Hello, welcome to a new episode of Germany in Focus, a podcast made possible thanks to members of The Local. Today we're talking about Germany's new cannabis clubs that are about to start cropping up. We are looking into the problems of patchy rural transport connections and how the government is looking to improve it, plus a change that could lead to more pedestrian zones in cities. Germany's new citizenship law is finally here, but centre-right politicians are already saying they want to reverse dual citizenship if they get into power next year. We'll look at how likely that is. We are going to hear about what this reform means to foreign residents in Germany and chat with Matt Bristow, a volunteer with the citizens' rights group British in Germany, who is about to become German himself. Lastly, we'll talk about how to deal with all the insects that appear in Germany in summer, from fruit flies to mosquitoes and wasps. I'm Rachel Loxton, and I'm in Berlin today with journalist Imogen Goodman and Paul Krantz. Hello.
Hi.
How's it going?
Yeah, good. I have to say I'm pretty unprepared for this sudden heat wave, though. It took me completely by surprise. We've had rain for weeks, and now suddenly 31 degrees. So, yeah.
It's really stressful. Guys, I actually wanted to chat to you about something quickly because I haven't been able to eat my normal diet recently due to a few health issues. But what I have been eating a lot of randomly is ice cream. So super healthy, obviously. But my usual zwei Kugeln im Becher, that is 2 scoops in a tub, is costing me $4.60.
Wow.
Almost
crazy.
a $5. Guys, what has happened? Is this how bad inflation has got?
Yeah. Honestly, when you first said that price, I thought, okay, well, like a tub of Ben & Jerry's, right? That's what that in my head costs. I don't tend to buy ice cream, but now you mention it, I did cycle past an ice cream shop the other day and saw 1 Kugel for €2.50. And I thought, oh, that's just pricey Mitte, kind of this posh area. It's probably just that. But I remember sort of checking it and thinking, that's a bit weird.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm afraid it's the norm, not just Mitte.
I think a $5, by the way, for a tub of Ben & Jerry's is also an outdated price now. I think that's up to like 7, almost 8 in Rewe now.
Oh, God. In Rewe, not even in the Späti.
Yeah, no, totally.
Well,
like
the Spätis, but everywhere, the Mitte Spätis.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Was it solidly like €1 scoops when you both moved here? Or
I feel like it was, at least I would say, maybe 3 years ago, I remember it being around $1.20 for a scoop.
Yeah, sounds about right.
That seemed to be the norm. And then I guess I just hadn't quite registered of how much it had gone up. And obviously the doner kebabs, they have famously gone up a little bit in Berlin especially.
Oh, wow, so much. Yeah, I'm still in my head in the €3 doner days. So when I see that they have some Angebot, some special offer and say that it's only, €6 for a doner, I'm like, well, that's double. That's double the normal price. So yeah, very outdated prices in my head.
It's interesting how much this stuff changes neighborhood to neighborhood too, even beyond like city to city.
For sure.
I moved within the last year to Neukölln, and suddenly all the doner places around my neighborhood, I can always find one with a sale that's still €3, $3.50. And I'm like, oh, wow, back to original pricing almost.
For sure.
Whereas if you're in Mitte or something, I think good luck.
No chance.
7, 8, 9.
Yeah.
€14 for a Spargel doner.
Oh, yeah. That's it. That's when you were splashing out when you're getting the asparagus doner. So we are heading into July, and one big change in Germany is that cannabis social clubs will be allowed. So to recap, cannabis is partially legalized in Germany. Since April, people have been allowed to carry it and smoke it, although there are a lot of restrictions. This is the second phase of the law, and it allows regulated cannabis clubs to pop up and residents can become members. But it's already proving to be an organizational nightmare, I believe. Paul, who is responsible for these clubs? What do we know so far?
Yeah, so I think organizational nightmare is probably a fair way to describe the rollout of the cannabis legalization in Germany so far. As you mentioned, this law is coming into effect in phases, and the first phase, which kind of establish the rules for how people can consume cannabis has already led to a fair amount of confusion over some interesting details to the law that just aren't quite clear. One that comes to mind is like consumers can have 3 plants at home or up to 50 grams of cannabis. But I know that plants can produce quite a bit more than 50 grams quite easily. So the question that comes to my mind is like, what happens if someone is growing 3 plants and then they end up with more than 50 grams? Are there rules about how they dispose of this? Can they just give it to someone? What's the deal there? How is that enforced? So this is just one example of a bunch of questions that cannabis users are kind of grappling with as this law comes into effect. But the more pressing issue at the moment, as you mentioned, is the opening of these cannabis clubs, which is supposed to begin as of Monday, July 1st. As of now, it seems like there are still plenty of concerns and some unknowns regarding how these clubs will be allowed to operate and how their product will be monitored. So the first major issue was which authority would be responsible for monitoring cannabis clubs. Municipalities in Germany had been very vocal since the beginning about not really wanting to deal with this, not being equipped for it, not having the resources. For now, it looks like clubs will be regulated by 3 different bodies in state governments. So those are the district governments, the state agencies for nature, environment, and consumer protection, and the chambers of agriculture.
Wow, so 3 different bodies.
Yeah, it's already,
keep
already
it simple,
a bit
right?
complicated, right? So in North Rhine-Westphalia, for example, the state's Agency for Nature, Environment, and Consumer Protection will be responsible for setting guidelines and monitoring the use of pesticides and fertilizers for cultivating marijuana or cannabis, and also for questions about packaging. So presumably ensuring that cannabis products are sold in clearly labeled and childproof containers. Then the Chambers of Agriculture would be responsible for looking at other aspects of the cultivation process, like product hygiene, standards for drying, storage, or the water content of the cannabis. It's also worth mentioning that while the federal law says clubs can begin their activities on July 1st, these legal hangups may end up pushing that date back in a lot of cases. So Suzanne Schneider, a health policy spokesman for FDP, has been critical of these delays to finalize the law in North Rhine-Westphalia in particular. And she noted in the Rheinische Post that although applications can be submitted from the 1st of July, it's completely unclear when permits would be granted and when cannabis cultivation can actually begin. It could take months.
What is the aim of these clubs actually, Paul? Like, how do they work?
I think put most simply, these cannabis clubs are basically Germany's answer to the question of how cannabis can be legally distributed in the country. So the whole point of legalization is to give consumers a safer alternative to the black market supply. But cannabis legalization law, as it stands, does not actually allow people to sell cannabis in Germany. So instead, they've allowed for the establishment of these member clubs. So the clubs are allowed to accept up to 500 members, and they basically collect membership fees that they can then take that investment, so to speak, put it towards cultivating cannabis, and then sell that back to members at discounted prices. So in a sense, they're basically like a members-only shop. And I think the idea here is that by pre-approving a select group of members, the clubs are reducing the risk of accidentally selling to, say, minors or people who don't actually live in the region. The Cannabis Social Club Berlin, for example, is one that is ready to launch immediately in the capital city. It's currently charging its members 12 euros per year to sign up. And they say this fee goes toward administration and political activities and the preparations for community cultivation. And this is all information on their website, by the way. They expect ultimately to charge members 10 euros per month as a membership fee, and then to sell cannabis for 6 to 10 euros per gram to members. But they also note that those final costs are an estimate and it could change due to uncertainties in the law. Of course, clubs are not only popping up in Berlin, but really all across Germany. And costs of membership and membership qualifications really vary heavily from club to club. So some clubs are accepting members for as low as €1 per year for now, whereas others are charging up to 160 euros per year.
Are these clubs expected to be popular then? Do we have any indication?
Yeah, I think we're already seeing that these clubs will be pretty popular right from the start. So some associations in Munich have said that they've already received thousands of registrations in April when the legislation was kind of initially coming into effect. Remember that the clubs are only legally allowed to accept 500 members for now. So I think we'll see pretty quickly in the coming weeks if there's really enough clubs to support the demand in Germany, or maybe if there's too many. But having scanned a few member club websites this morning, most of the clubs I found are still accepting applications, at least. Some of them had notes on their website saying that spots were filling rapidly. And of course, whatever members these clubs already have now joined the clubs before they are actually cultivating any cannabis. So that's rather large numbers of people expressing interest before any guarantee of access to actual cannabis product.
Right. We haven't actually seen them in action yet.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for those updates, Paul. German cities are known for their pretty good transport infrastructure, but you just have to hop a few miles out to see that much of the country is not well connected. Imogen, you've been writing recently about a plan to change this from the Transport Minister Volker Wissing. What is he proposing?
Yeah, absolutely. This is all a little speculative right now, but Wissing has indeed been putting forward some proposals for how those really patchy transport connections in rural areas could be improved over the coming years. And his main idea revolves around what he's calling transfer hubs. So the idea behind this is that you would increase the number of train stations that offer quick and reliable connections into cities and towns from these kind of rural areas, and thereby kind of allow commuters to easily transfer from one mode of transport to the other. So either from a bus connection, a car, or a bicycle onto a train. So instead of relying solely on the car, in other words, as a lot of people in the countryside often do, you'd simply use your car as a means of getting to the nearest train station. This feels a little bit like that concept of park and ride that you have in places like the US, I believe, and the UK, where you'll drive to the outskirts of a city and get the bus into town. But instead of being kind of suburban bus stations, there'll be train stations that will be further away and serve a much wider community. Or that's the idea anyway.
I was thinking that when you were talking, I was like, that sounds like a park and ride. And it is kind of surprising that Germany maybe doesn't have so much of them, it sounds like, if this is more of a fresh concept.
Exactly. Unless he's just being cheeky and rebranding it for us.
Oh, yeah.
Hoping we won't notice.
The Umsteig hubs or something. Is that right?
Umsteig hubs.
Yeah.
They needed a German name for Germany.
Yeah. What kind of impact would this have then? And is it looking likely?
Well, it's not entirely clear whether he's talking about expanding the rail connections that much or just ensuring that these local train stations have better transport links and parking facilities. It does sound a little bit more like the latter. And he said that states would be responsible for picking out where these areas are for the transport hubs. But as far as Wissing is concerned, this kind of hybrid car and train option could really help to cut CO2 emissions significantly. We know that the transport sector has been overshooting its CO2 emissions in recent years. So the example that the Transport Minister used was of a commuter who maybe drives 25 kilometres to the nearest transfer hub, park and ride, to hop on a train, rather than travelling the whole, say, 100 kilometres to work by car. So he's really hoping that this idea would encourage commuters out in the countryside, in these rural areas, to consider public transport a viable option and make use of the €49 ticket, for example. There hasn't been that much take-up in the countryside, probably for this reason.
Mm-hmm.
That said, I think those groups who are really advocating for a genuine transition away from cars and towards a reliable and usable public transport network would probably call Wissing's plans a little unambitious, to say the least. So I think everyone would probably agree that better transport links in the countryside are desperately needed in Germany. And that's actually been backed up by some recent studies. There was one carried out by Deutsche Bahn, or a subsidiary of Deutsche Bahn, back in 2021. And they found that while 27 million people in German cities are really well served by transport connections, there are 55 million people who then lived in rural or more suburban areas, and they just didn't have acceptable or really reliable public transport connections at all. So that's really a huge, broad section of the population who I think occasionally do get a bit forgotten about by us city dwellers. So one comment that Wissing made that I thought was quite revealing was that he said he thought it would be impossible to actually build out the rural transport network in terms of adding more reliable bus connections, for example, and really serving those areas that aren't currently served. So he said the demand wasn't there and neither were the workers. So he might have a point when it comes to the labour shortages, but the demand thing seems a little like a catch-22. How do you actually know there's no demand for a reliable bus service if you've only ever offered an unreliable one? So in a way, looking at these transport hubs, it could be seen as a bit of a get out from, say, saying, okay, we'll add some parking spaces to the nearby train station and then everything's good in the countryside.
Yes, that does sound like a very politician answer or, type of thing to say, doesn't it?
Definitely.
In other transport news, there's been a recent change in Germany that could be good news for pedestrians and cyclists. Can you tell us about that, Imogen?
Yes. Well, I'm sorry, at the risk of everyone dropping off to sleep a little bit, this does all relate back to the Road Traffic Act. So very exciting piece of legislation. But yeah, bear with me because it is actually something pretty important and it is very relevant to our lives, even if we don't know it. So one of the reasons that the councils and other kind of local authorities have really struggled with the transition away from cars in Germany, this Mobilitätswende that we talk about, is the fact that this pretty ancient piece of legislation, so this Road Traffic Act, has always dictated that whenever a decision is made about a local road, the ease of the flow of traffic, so cars in other words, should be prioritised over everything else. That is the highest priority. So that's really meant that it's been very difficult to do things like pedestrianising inner cities, for example. You probably remember last year that the pedestrianisation of Friedrichstraße in Berlin was overturned by the administrative court in Berlin, and this was pretty much exactly the reason why. So this has also meant that when councils maybe want to put in a 30km/h speed limit in their local areas, maybe because there's schools nearby, or expand cycle lanes, for example, they've had to fill in these endless piles of paperwork to show that there's no risk of traffic jams or of inconveniencing motorists. So there was actually an unsuccessful attempt to overturn this legislation last year. But thanks to a lot of pressure from local communes in the meantime, also from grassroots campaigners, people writing to their local governments, the federal and state governments have finally agreed to amend this law. So the new version now puts things like climate protection, health and urban development on an even footing with cars. So this is a pretty major change and we could see it bearing fruit in the next few years, maybe even months. It means that it will be a lot easier for local governments to create things like cycle lanes and pedestrian zones in their local areas. And ultimately, it just gives a lot more power back to local governments and their residents to really reshape their cities and towns however they like.
That is a really interesting update. Thank you so much for that, Imogen. Okay, guys, this feels wild to say, but we are recording this podcast on the Wednesday. By the time this episode comes out on the Friday, the new citizenship law will be in force officially.
Hooray!
Wow.
That's very exciting.
Huge news.
Huge news. So Thursday, June 27th, of course, was the date that the new naturalization law kicks in. Everyone can start applying if they haven't already, if they qualify. But I'm really sorry to dampen the mood already.
Oh, no.
Dun, dun.
But we have been hearing this week about the Conservatives' plans to overturn dual citizenship. That's what they've said if they get into power next year. Imogen, this isn't really a surprise because they hate dual citizenship. At least that's what they've said. But what are the politicians saying now?
Yeah, they're absolutely furious that this has gone through, that it's finally becoming a reality. And I think we should all get our bingo cards of CDU claims about dual nationality at the ready because all of them have been ticked. It's a full house this week. So on Tuesday, CDU immigration spokesperson Alexander Trom did a fuming interview with DPA in which he kind of railed about the new law. And once again, he said, bingo card at the ready. He claimed it would harm the integration process. Citizenship should come at the end of the integration process, not at the start. That's one they like to peddle out. And that, of course, it will allow Islamist extremists to influence Germany from within. That's the classic. So he claimed that the CDU is so dead set against this that they would immediately aim to revoke the law, at least by scrapping the dual nationality part, if they re-entered government next year, which does look quite likely as it stands. And they said that they would also once again increase these residence requirements that are being dropped. So they would be back up to 8 years, I assume, rather than the current 5.
Mm-hmm. How possible is this then? I guess a lot of things would need to line up for that to happen.
Yeah, it's definitely a scary thought. And I can definitely see why comments like this would be really unnerving for foreigners, especially people who've waited so many years for this law to pass. But I think it is very important to put this whole thing in context. So firstly, although the CDU and CSU, sort of centre-right parties, are definitely doing very well in the polls right now, there's no chance I can see that they would have enough votes next year for an absolute majority. So more than 50% they need. And that would mean that they need to go into a coalition with another party. And since they've ruled out working with the far-right AfD and the left-wing Linker Party, their only realistic options would be to work with either the Social Democrats, the Greens, or the Free Democrats, all of whom are very pro-immigration and all of whom worked on this bill. It's their legislation. So assuming that they get this coalition, that they somehow manage to convince their coalition partner to agree to scrap their own legislation, which, as I say, I think is quite unlikely, then they would have to get the bill through the Bundesrat. And according to experts that I've spoken to, they would need an absolute majority in the Bundesrat in order to do that. So just a brief explanation. Bundesrat is the upper house of parliament that's controlled by the state governments. And so the state coalitions all have to agree in order for their votes to be counted as anything other than an abstention. So in other words, it would be next to impossible for the CDU and CSU to get the numbers they need to flip this. The other thing I think it's worth really emphasising is that nobody is talking about revoking dual nationality from anyone who's already got it. So Germany's constitution has really strong laws against stripping someone of their nationality. So even in the incredibly unlikely event that this law did get changed back, those who have their passports won't have any reason to worry. So that is worth saying, just in case people are freaking out.
Yep, really, really good to know. Thanks for that update. So what does this reform mean to Germany's foreign residents? It's a big question we're going to explore a bit now. Let's firstly hear from Matt Bristow, who is a longtime volunteer of citizens' rights groups British in Germany and is also just about to become German. I asked him to share what he thinks this means to foreigners.
I think it means different things to different people. On the one hand, there's some really practical things which are going to change. So, you have the right to vote, I think is really important for some people, or just having the security in the knowledge that you're here to stay and you can't have your rights to stay living in Germany taken away. You're the same as everyone else. I think that's a really important thing for a lot of people. There's, of course, added benefits as well of being a German citizen in that you're also then a European citizen. And for some people, they may be thinking of not staying in Germany for the rest of their lives, but wanting to move elsewhere in Europe. And so for people who aren't already EU citizens, that's another bonus. Even if you're just thinking, well, I'm going to be working here for the next 20 years, but I'd like to retire to Spain or Italy or somewhere warm. The other thing I think in terms of practical things, which is really important to some people, is there certain jobs that you have to be a German citizen for. I've known of examples of people who want to join the police or become a firefighter, and they haven't been able to do that because they haven't had citizenship. But on the other hand, there's also the emotional side, that sense of belonging, that you're not a foreigner anymore, you're a German like everyone else. And I think that's something which shouldn't be underestimated. I think for a lot of British citizens in particular, that's a really important aspect, because before Brexit, we were EU citizens. I know certainly I felt like I was a citizen living in Germany before Brexit. And then suddenly I was put into this different category of foreigner. And that had quite an emotional impact on me, even though I wouldn't have necessarily known that beforehand. Now, sort of 8 years after the Brexit referendum, for British people in particular, that there's an opportunity for those of us who weren't able to get German citizenship before Brexit to become German citizens and still keep our previous nationality. I think that's a really important aspect of being able to have both your original nationality and German citizenship, and not having to choose between one identity or the other.
One thing, Matt, that we've talked about a lot at the Local Germany, and I know you are aware of as well, is the issue with the expected delays with getting citizenship. We've already seen a lot of that even before the law has come into force. Do you think Germany is prepared for this law change?
In a word, no. I think that it's different in different places, of course. So perhaps in a smaller area, which doesn't have so many international residents, they might be able to manage the changes more easily if they haven't got such a great number of new applications coming through. But I do think there will be more applications coming in across the country. But because in Germany, everything is organized at a local level rather than a national level, the picture is going to be really different across different parts of the country. Here in Berlin, where I am, we've had a big change this year with the process being centralized from the boroughs to a new office for the whole city. And if I can say it like this, it's been a bit of a hot mess. So I think the intention has been there to do something really useful and to optimize the systems and really get people through faster. But there have been huge teething problems with a massive backlog that new office has inherited from the boroughs, but also they had to scan 40,000 files, and that took far too long. I'm not sure it's even finished yet. So that's just one example of where I think local areas are trying to improve their systems to build in extra capacity. Again, here in Berlin, they have recruited a huge number of new staff and they're still looking for more staff. But I don't think that that's going to be enough.
Absolutely. And Matt, it is very exciting to hear that you are actually just about to get German citizenship. So you have been through the process. First of all, let me ask you, did it take a long time?
You could say that. I put in my application in August 2018. So we're coming up to 6 years. But yes, so it's taken a while, but I am finally getting my citizenship on Monday, on the 1st of July. So the waiting has come to an end for me. So I'm really pleased about that.
How do you feel finally that you're becoming German?
I think there's mixed emotions. I think I'm really looking forward to it. Can't quite believe that the day has almost arrived for me now. I do think for me that it's a mix of those things I was saying at the beginning, both practical and emotional things for me. And feeling like I'm no longer going to be a foreigner, I'll just be a German citizen is going to be really important for me. And I think then I'm also kind of just starting to get my head around what does it mean to be a German citizen? I don't think I've even really got an answer to that yet. What does it mean for me actually being part of this country in a different way? And I think that's something which I'll be thinking about as well for weeks and months and years to come, probably.
Great to hear from Matt there. And we will follow up with a story on the Local Germany's website very soon to hear more about Matt's journey to German citizenship and why it did take so long for his application to be processed. Paul, we recently surveyed our readers on this topic about what it means to them to get citizenship, and we got a really big response. Can you tell us what a few people said?
Yeah, so asked what citizenship would mean to them, a lot of our readers highlighted some practical aspects of gaining a German passport and being able to travel more freely to their home country. Kandakar, who was 42 from Bangladesh, said, "Free movement with the world's strongest passport is the main goal here. I can live in Germany with my family as long as I want, and the future of my children is secured. I can change my job at any time without fear. I can live outside of Germany without a time limit or losing residency." Others highlighted the benefits of becoming an EU citizen and being able to move freely within Europe. Sarah, 35, who has lived for 7 years in Germany, said, quote, "Don't tell the Germans, but for me it's more about having EU citizenship than German citizenship." She also noted that as a researcher, having the ability to move to another country for, say, a research opportunity would be great for her. And then there were also plenty of readers who highlighted the value of simply becoming German as like an abstract concept. For many people who've lived here for years, they see naturalization as the completion of a long integration process. So we heard from Donnie, who's 31, and noted that he lives in a smaller district in Germany. He said that becoming a German citizen means opportunities for me and the generations following me. He added that becoming naturalized would mark the, quote, culmination of years of hard work to make it in Germany. Like so many readers, Donnie is currently waiting for an appointment to begin his citizenship application process.
Oh, that's really lovely to hear. And we will, of course, put the link to that story and a few other stories in the show notes so you can hear more from readers. One thing about the warmer months in Germany is that the creepy crawlies really do come out. We're talking about the fruit flies, the ants, the mosquitoes, the wasps, the moths, all of these types of things. And it can be really annoying. So you do have your windows open in the summer a bit more. So that is one reason that you get more wildlife inside. But also, just if you don't take out a bin quickly enough, you can develop an insect problem just out of nowhere. So these are the strong hazards of living in Germany in the summer. Imogen, can you relate to this? Do you have any tips?
Yeah, I can definitely relate. Unfortunately, I can relate all too much. So the absolute burden of my existence in Germany in summer are the kitchen moths. Those insanely persistent little guys who like spring up out of nowhere when the weather gets warmer, and then they seem to infect everything that you own, all of the food in your cupboard, your pasta, rice, herbs. I've even had one in a mustard jar. I don't know how that happened. Don't ask me.
It just flew in there and got stuck, presumably.
It was stuck in the lid. It was horrible. I thought that was an airtight container, but apparently not. The crazy thing about them, as I'm kind of hinting at, is that they really breed so quickly and they just seem to be almost invincible, or at least they're insanely hard to get rid of. But I do have a tip that could help. So this might sound a little bit like that nursery rhyme. There was an old lady who swallowed a fly, but you can apparently get another set of flies to infect your kitchen if you have a kitchen moth problem, and that will magically deal with your kitchen moth problem. So, okay, hear me out.
Okay,
it sounds like a bad idea, I know.
We're listening with caution.
So curious.
These little guys are apparently called Ichneumon or Schlupfwespen in German. And apparently they live off the eggs of the kitchen moths. So they basically kind of attack the problem at its source. So they eat the eggs. And then once all the kitchen moth eggs are gone, they run out of food. And then they end up dying themselves, which kind of takes care of your insect and your moth problem. That said, these little guys are apparently really pricey. You apparently need one strip on every affected shelf in your kitchen. So the more old-fashioned way is simply to chuck out a whole lot of food, sanitize everything, get some airtight containers, and just start all over again if you don't want to experiment with the baby Ichneumon.
Where do you buy things like this?
I think you can get them online. I've done not that I'm Googling this pretty often, but I did have a bad infestation at one point a few years back and was getting pretty desperate and started to look what the price was for these these little bugs. I never did it though.
Do you know anyone who tried? No?
I haven't yet. Okay. No.
Not tested yet.
Not tested, but we appreciate the research that went into that. And it is true. Moths are the absolute worst. I've had an infestation of them in my kitchen once in an old Berlin flat. And you do just have to get rid of everything. Unless you buy these fancy flies. For me, the most annoying thing about summer in Germany is fruit flies. I feel like it's almost impossible not to have them. If anyone listening doesn't have these, we call them beasties in Scotland, just little creepy crawlies. If they don't have them in their home, especially their kitchen in the warmer months, I need to know how they're doing it.
Yeah, impossible.
Well, that's the thing, is it? I don't know. So the trick is meant to be you fill a little jar with white vinegar, a couple of drops of washing up liquid, and then put a bit of cling film on top with a few holes, and it is meant to catch these flies. Mm-hmm. But my friend Alice told me recently that this actually attracts the flies.
Oh, no.
Well, it attracts them into the trap where they die, right?
Yes, but it attracts them. Apparently, they can smell it from a kilometer away.
They're coming from outside to get to your trap?
They're coming through the drains and stuff. All these, like...
Oh, my gosh.
So, okay, so I don't know if this is true, but apparently that she said the way to do it is you just never leave a single, bit of food. Get your dishes cleaned every single moment. Wipe your bin down. Take your bins out very quickly. All of that stuff. And then put boiling water down your drain every evening. And then that stops the kind of hatching process. And do not put the traps out, because then you're just like inviting them into your home. So,
Wild.
Yeah, I don't know.
I would say anecdotally, these vinegar traps always work for me at reducing numbers overall.
Yeah. I agree, but...
Yeah. I tend to use just a dash of apple cider vinegar and I skip the dish soap. But some people also use like honey. Or sweet things apparently can. But then you're feeding them, right?
Then it's like your pet.
It's like sure. But I definitely agree that like keeping everything clean and the food away is probably the best way. And like you have to take the compost out all the time. Like in the winter, I'd leave mine for a week or 2 weeks, but in the summer, like more than a few days, forget it. Swarms of flies.
Totally. Before we finish up for the day, Paul, can you share with us the rules around wasps in Germany? Because there's a few things people need to know.
Yeah, so killing wasps is basically illegal in Germany, and it's punishable by fines up to thousands of euros. Yeah, I will not forget this one because it was...
Because you did it.
No, I didn't do it. On the record, I definitely have never killed a wasp in Germany. But I was with some friends in my early months in Germany, and we were at a cafe outside or something, and someone swatted down a wasp and just stomped on it. And a German friend in the group immediately interrupted all of us and was like, you can be fined for that. And a bunch of us were foreigners and we were like, what? And we had to look this up. And so this is how I first heard about this rule. Basically, you can be fined quite a bit for killing a wasp in Germany. And that's because some of them are protected species. And Germany takes protected species quite seriously. So a couple of things to note. First is that there are hundreds of wasp species in Germany, and only a few of them are on the IUCN Red List of threatened species that makes them like really highly protected. But Germany also has this kind of broader rule against killing wildlife unnecessarily, and this could also theoretically be extended to wasps. So I think regardless of the type of wasp, you're better off not killing it probably. And depending on the state you're in, you could be fined between 5,000 to 50,000 euros. So it's really quite
intense.
Yeah,
it's the price of a flat in some states.
You really don't want to get slapped with the bigger end of that fine, right? But I think the reality here is that almost never happens for like a one-off wasp killing. And also there is an exception for people with wasp allergies. If they feel physically threatened by a wasp and then they were to kill it, that would be okay.
Self-defense.
Yeah,
exactly. Self-defense is allowed.
That would stand up in court.
But I think the most important thing to understand here is if you find a wasp hive near your home, don't try to get rid of it yourself. Call pest control, because some of them, if they were a threatened species, you could really be in serious trouble for interfering with it. Also, messing with a wasp hive on your own, kind of a dangerous stunt, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So the main takeaway here is if you find a wasp hive, you're better off leaving it to the experts. And finally, if wasps are harassing you while you're eating on your balcony, for instance, there are a couple tricks you can try to kind of dissuade them or keep them away. One would be to divert their attention. You could do this by leaving out a little glass of apple juice away from you, because they like sweet things, and maybe they'll go there and just drink some apple juice happily and leave you to your lunch. Another thing that you could try is to ward them off with strong smells, such as by burning coffee powder. This is a tip I've heard from people. I haven't tested it much myself.
So you don't just have to flap around your hands wildly and go, Yeah. That's the only tactic I've ever heard of.
Yeah.
But this is amazing. That's way cleverer.
You can't have like a good chat with them. Okay, guys, I feel like there's so much more to talk about with insects in Germany. So I think we'll have to revisit that in a later episode.
I think so. Insect special.
Exactly, because we haven't talked about ticks, mosquitoes, all these things.
Mosquitoes, yeah. I've got some experience with those. Okay,
you keep them. We'll hear about them. That's it for this week. Thank you so much, as always, to all our listeners. We will add the links in the show notes to the stories we've been talking about today. It would really mean a lot to us if you hit follow, left a rating or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This week's panelists have been Imogen Goodman and Paul Krantz. We also heard from Matt Bristow, and our sound engineer is Rhys Edwards. I'm Rachel Loxton. We hope you enjoyed listening and see you again next week. Until then, take care.